Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Weiler, and I'm a professor emeritus at the Peter A. Allard School of Law at the University of British Columbia. I taught at the Allard School of Law for 46 years before retiring a few years ago, but I'm just so grateful to be able to be continuing to work within the jurisdiction of the Allard School. But what's the anti-corruption law program? 7 years ago, my friend and colleague John Ritchie and I conceived and started to put together the anti-corruption law program. And so in that way, we're the co-founding directors. And about 3 years ago, we were joined by Norm Baldwin as director, and this year by Dr. Alex Komaroff, who's now our Director of Research and Programming. So back in 2016, when this started, John and I recognized that there were three organizations doing excellent work in the anti-corruption field, but they were doing it separately. And so all of them were focused on a similar topic: what are the best practices in fighting corruption? But there were different core competencies at play. The Peter Allard School of Law, where I was, its focus is on academic courses, graduate research, academic scholarship, what you'd imagine from a law school. The International Center for Criminal Law Reform, ICLEAR, that was a UN-affiliated organization doing top-level sort of contract research and programming in a variety of areas. And by the way, in 2021, ICLEAR gave birth to the Vancouver Anti-Corruption Institute, which is the program primarily responsible for today's program. And the third organization was Transparency International Canada chapter. And as we know, it's the leading NGO in the field of anti-corruption. It's focused on raising awareness and advocating for policy reform to fight corruption. So what John and I saw was that there were three organizations doing this work, but what could we do it better if we worked in a partnership? And that was put together during 2016. And since then, we've been doing a lot of work together in continuing professional education in programming such as today. Right now, we've done about 40 conferences, colloquia, webinars, but in the first few years, everything was face-to-face. But in 2020, we were able to, when the pandemic hit, we couldn't meet face-to-face, and then we went through a whole different phase, and really with the able offices of the Center for Business Law at Allard and their crackerjack technical team, we started doing webinars, and that's been a huge boom for us in a way that we're able to do more at less expense, to attract panelists from various jurisdictions, as we're seeing today, and also the reach of our audience grew exponentially. And through the Center for Business Law, we're able to take these webinars and archive them. And so they're available within a few days of the actual event. And so people who cannot be here as part of the live audience registrants, you can get to them later. So we're immensely grateful for Carol Liao, who was the head of the Center for Business Law for the first few years. Now it's Cameron Hutchison from the Allard Law School for the kind of support that institution has given this program, including the technical team that we have today with Justin and Sarah. So without that, this could not happen. But what we're all about is these people who contribute their time, the panelists and the organizers, so that we can teach each other about the best practices in fighting corruption. And so special thanks to Peter German and his team at iClear and the VACI, and Toby Mendel is the new chair at Transparency International Canada, and his team, which for many years was James Cohen, was the executive director of TI Canada, and now they are just about to announce a new executive director there. So thank you, TI Canada. I'd like to acknowledge that the anti-corruption law program is connected to the University of British Columbia, and we acknowledge with gratitude the UBC campuses are situated on traditional unceded territories in Vancouver campus of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and the Okanagan campus in Kelowna to the Sajeks First Nation. So the special thanks today actually to Rachel Siegel. Rachel did the lion's share of the work to organize this session. She conceived the topic after sort of a rigorous needs assessment. She imagined the themes, posed the questions, recruited the panelists. Rachel did the work, and our job was really to support Rachel in doing the excellent work that she is doing, so that we have gathered this group of experts to teach each other and to teach all of us, right? So we're very grateful for that. And Rachel will do the wrap up at the end of the session. So my privilege now, though, is to introduce Jessie O'Neill. Jessie's going to be our moderator today. She is Senior Manager of Global Compliance for Freeport-McMoRan, which is a US-based giant, international mining company. For Freeport-McMoRan, Jessie oversees that company's anti-corruption, anti-fraud programs, code of conduct compliance, conflicts of interest, reporting programs, and she's got extensive experience in internal investigations, security and human rights, data analytics, systems development, so with that skill set and experience, she's perfect to be our moderator. We're so fortunate to have her. Prior to working for Freeport-McMoRan, she was at Barrick Gold, which is the second largest mining company in the world. And I had the pleasure actually of having Jessie come to my class a few years ago and share her ideas with my students at the Allard Law School. So nice to see Jessie again. And prior to Barrick, she was part of the corporate intelligence group at KPMG. So she's the perfect person to moderate today's session. Thank you to Jessie. Thanks in advance from us at the ACLP to our panelists, and particular thanks to Rachel. So now over to you, Jessie.
Thank you, Joe, and also to VACI and the ACLP. And yeah, I think we should all acknowledge Rachel's work in putting this together. I just want to say that e-government traditionally would be a topic discussed in the public sector, but it is a very relevant topic in the private sector as well, because we focus a lot on trying to reduce the touch points between people in business and government officials. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart as well. So thank you very much. I will be moderating today's webinar regarding e-government, and I just want to start off with a very brief definition for anyone who's new to the topic. E-government is the provision of government services using digital means or through digital means. And I think the discussion should primarily focus on the impact on corruption that this transition is having. We are incredibly lucky to have the panel we have today. They're very qualified and they've got a broad reach of experience with digital government, and you'll hear about the different jurisdictions in which they work and specialize. Today, we're going to cover topics on the benefits, barriers, and evolution of e-government, among other topics. And I'm hoping it will be an informal roundtable. All attendees should see a Q&A button at the bottom of their screen where you can submit questions. I will tackle those either as we go through the preset questions that we have or at the end. And if you have any technical issues, please use the chat to let the technical team know. And now on to our introductions. Our three panelists are Nancy Dubas, Paula Perez, and Jaimie Boyd. I'll start with Nancy. Nancy is an economist specializing in the economic evaluation of public expenditures and development programming. She has worked throughout the African continent and in Haiti. Her latest publication is a cost-benefit analysis of an e-government procurement implementation in low and middle income countries. It's co-written by the Open Contracting Group and the World Bank. Nancy obtained her doctorate in economics from the New School for Social Research in New York. Our second panelist is Paula. Paula joined the Open Government Partnership in July 2019, working in the Americas Country Support Team, and she is currently a program officer in the Thematic Policies Arenas team. Paula supports efforts to mobilize cross-country coalitions, strengthen partnerships, and provide knowledge resources, working with OGP governments, civil society, and other partners. And she does this to provide advancements and reforms in anti-corruption and digital governance areas. Prior to joining OGP, Paula worked at the Asociación Civil por la Igualdad y Justicia, ACIJ, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She was an independent consultant on fiscal openness, public sector transparency, and civil participation. She holds a degree in political science from Universidad de Buenos Aires and is currently working on her international affairs master's degree thesis from the Universidad Torquato de Tella. Highly educated Paula, lots of schooling. Jaimie's our third panelist. She works with clients to accelerate digital change in the public sector, helping governments to better serve citizens using modern technologies. She previously was the Chief Digital Officer for the Government of British Columbia and has held a variety of other leadership roles within the Government of Canada. She's recognized as one of the most 100 influential people in digital government, and she's a frequent speaker on service modernization, data-driven leadership, and the future of government. And I'm really glad that Jaimie chose this as one of her chances to speak on the topic. So that takes us through our introductions, and I'd like to start with the first question, which I posed to all three panelists. And Nancy, maybe we can start with you. How did you get into the digital government field, and what work relevant to anti-corruption are you currently focusing on?
Hello, everyone. Actually, what I spend most of my time doing is evaluating government expenditures, the efficiency of government expenditures vis-a-vis their development goals. And I work with the Copenhagen Consensus Center. We've been doing this all over the world. Now, about 2 years ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation approached us about evaluating global development goals. That is the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the goals, I think it's goal number 16, I'm pretty sure it's goal number 16, is combating corruption in public procurement. And there are several indicators to track the degree and intensity of corruption in public procurement. Now, public procurement obviously can transform a country. I mean, in most countries, the government is the largest buyer of goods and services. And so it can transform a market. It can create markets as well, it can stimulate innovation. But unfortunately, it's also tied to bribery, kickbacks, and collusion. And so we ended up spending quite a bit of time studying public procurement across the world. So that's how I ended up here.
It's a good point about the government being able to sort of forge a new industry, right? Or forge a new market, because they have so many projects in so many different areas, and real organization would be required, right? To manage the flow of funds and the delivery of contracts. Jaimie, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking people. I'm in Victoria. My sort of journey towards digital government is maybe a convoluted one to some extent. I'm an economist by training, and I was a Government of Canada economist for many years. And I got quite frustrated with data quality over the years, spending lots of time cleaning data, trying to gather actionable insights from government data assets, got me quite passionate about essentially investing in really effective state capacity around data stewardship. And that led me to a role within the Treasury Board Secretariat federally, leading efforts around open government and open data, specifically through the management of open.canada.ca. If you are passionate about anti-corruption and open data in Canada, that's a website that you absolutely need to check out. The Government of Canada is a world-leading government when it comes to transparency and open government, which we would typically define as not just transparency, but also accountability around that transparency, participation on the basis of that transparency, and when we do it really well, cross-sector collaboration and innovation. So I spent a number of years working there, trying to do things like apply data standards across federal data assets so that they were more actionable, and got very passionate about the opportunity to apply these best practices at scale using open source technologies, for example. And that led me to a role with the Government of British Columbia, leading our digital government efforts, and today with Deloitte, where I serve as our national leader for digital government. In terms of the work that I do to how my work impacts anti-corruption and government openness, it's really quite upstream relative to what you'll hear from Nancy or Paula. I think there are lots of different advantages from being digital when it comes to anti-corruption, but one that we'll speak about shortly is essentially around enhancing the administrative state, building a culture that is based on leveraging best tools in an accountable fashion to better serve Canadians and people around the world. And so I spend a lot of time looking to use modern technologies with our government clients across Canada to essentially build out that state capacity for great service delivery.
Thank you, Jaimie. Your experience is deep and broad, and Deloitte should give you a lot of exposure to different groups, and you know, they're working in so many different areas.
That's right. Yeah.
Paula?
Thank you, Jessie, and thanks, Nancy and Jaimie. Really glad to be here, sharing this panel, this discussion. So I think my interest in government openness and how digital tools can be leveraged for government openness really started when I was studying political science at the University of Buenos Aires. I was in Argentina at that time. I'm originally from Argentina. I've been living in Brussels now for some time, and I also lived in the US before. For the first time, Argentina was instituting primary elections, and we got together with a group of students and created a website to provide more information and guidance about sort of the process, because there was very little information and information on each candidate's platform. So it was sort of my first approach to digital, basically, providing information to citizens on a very important event that was upcoming. I then started working in the civil society sector. I worked at the Asociación Civil por la Igualdad y la Justicia, where my interest and sort of my advocacy for open government became more actionable. I started engaging in OGP processes and initiatives related to anti-corruption, to strengthening democracy and improving transparency, oversight across different levels, at the national level, at the local level in the city of Buenos Aires also. And for the past 4 years, I have been working with the Open Government Partnership in the support unit, in the thematic policy areas team. OGP, for those who might not be as familiar, is a partnership of 76 national members, more than 100 local members, and thousands of civil society organizations engaged across the partnership. You've mentioned at the start during the introduction, Transparency International Canada, very much engaged in the OGP process in Canada. And as Jaimie was saying, also Canada was the co-chair of the Open Government Partnership during 2018-2019. So really, really wonderful to have you as co-chairs and all your work on digital and inclusive digital, right? Which has been fantastic, and you left a huge legacy there that of course Canada continues to advance. And really at the core of OGP is that model of co-creation and multi-stakeholder dialogue, and domestically owned action plans that really tackle issues across different policy areas, with a view that transparency, civic engagement, and accountability really strengthen democracy and bring better outcomes for society. And in my work, I support government, civil society, and other partners to really leverage the OGP platform to advance those reforms. And we do this by creating opportunities for peer learning, for sharing experiences, brokering relationships with thematic experts or thematic partners who can provide technical support to the countries where it is needed, and also helping bridge global fora commitments, which, as you know, there's a lot of global fora on anti-corruption, to real implementation at the country level, including through our OGP action plans. So that's just a little about me.
Thank you, Paula. Hearing you all sort of articulate the thesis statement of your careers tells me we've got a really broad awareness of different areas. So the next questions we have coming up, I'm making notes on who's the best person to answer it, and you've really made that easy for me, so thank you. Our next question is on benefits. So Nancy, I think this one is best to start with you because you're dealing with sort of the contract side and the spend side. What do you see as the primary benefits of e-government, particularly as they relate to combating corruption? So I think we're talking about the spending heft, right, that government has. So if you see the transfer to e-government, what do you see as the primary benefits of that?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, your audio is good.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll be happy to list the benefits that we've observed from countries implementing e-procurement systems. However, I did want to make a point that e-procurement systems, procurement systems in a large number of countries, I think it's about 70 who are still paper-based. It's exceptionally difficult to identify and measure and quantify and monetize corruption. We have indications that there is corruption, obviously. If year after year, there's a single bidder for the same contract, if the quality of services is poor, poor roads, poor infrastructure, despite there being a vetting process, if expressions of interest don't appear in newspapers and other printed media, and there are construction projects all around, but no one ever saw the opportunity to bid for them. So those are signs of corruption. And the World Bank Enterprise Survey does a pretty good job of trying to estimate the size of corruption across countries. Actually, the OECD also does a good job of doing that. And so when we talk about the benefits, I can only talk about what we observe after the implementation of an e-procurement system. So what we observe after is a clear and marked reduction in transaction costs. And that normally stems from having to actually go to the government office, pick up the bidding documents, and there are waiting times associated with that. Filling out the bid evaluation, trying to get back to the government office to hand it in, And the copies that need to be made, because these are paper-based systems, sometimes you have to make 5, 6 copies of exceptionally large bid. And so we notice a reduction in transaction costs, and that reduction obviously is felt by firms, bidding firms. But there's also an increase in workflow productivity on the government side. We've noticed, obviously, with the digitalization of the service, they work faster and more efficient. They can handle more bidding processes over the same amount of time. We've also noticed an increase in the number of bidders. And so what used to be, for example, uniforms for the military, what used to be a single bidder, now the number of bidding firms has increased. And also the size of the firm. Typically, the bidding firms are large, behemoths. And in developing countries, that's tied to, these large firms are tied to wealthy families. Whereas after the implementation of an e-procurement system, we notice more opportunities for small and medium enterprises. So there's also a better distribution of wealth. There are other economic benefits like a decrease in advertising costs, because obviously if you're in a paper-based system, then technically if you're fully transparent and you're still in a paper-based system, you have to advertise everything, right? The expressions of interest, the call for proposals, you have to advertise the firms that bid, everything has to be printed and distributed. And so, and those costs go into the hundreds of millions of dollars, because that has to be done for every single contract. And so there are other economic benefits like a decrease in advertising costs. And then after all of those benefits, we didn't use any of them for the publication. In fact, we used the fall in the prices paid by government for goods and services. On average, there's about a 7% decrease. And so that 7% becomes more space in the fiscal envelope to devote to development expenditures.
Nancy, I just have a follow-up question. You were talking about the benefits after the implementation of an e-government system. How long does it take you to see that benefit after it comes in?
That's a good question. I can tell you what's been happening is that this is across the world. This is not only in developing countries. On average, 50%, only 50%. I mean, if you set up a system, you should set it up for whole of government. I don't know, that's my feeling. But across the world, only 50% of government purchases goes through the e-procurement system. That said, of that 50%, we see a decline in the prices paid by 7% decline in the prices paid by governments for these goods and services. As soon as they can implement the system in a leading ministry, and in most countries, the leading ministry is the ministry that does the infrastructure, right? Because those are the goods and services that are the most expensive, and they usually run for long periods of time. So this would be transport. I mean, they vary by name, but hard infrastructure, roads, bridges, these things. Once there is uptake in those ministries, the benefit is seen almost immediately.
Thank you. Jaimie, Paula, do you have anything you want to address in Nancy's statement, or Paula, do you want to respond to the question?
Go ahead, Paula.
Okay, sure. Thanks, and I think what Nancy was saying definitely makes sense. We also see some interesting results coming from the open procurement platforms across different OGP members that have been implementing those through their action plans. We have very good experiences in Ukraine, and I can share that a little bit more about that afterwards. In Colombia, in Paraguay, really in Italy, really across the globe. Perhaps to answer the question, in terms of benefits, I think, first of all, just underscoring that since OGP was started, the members have been using digital technologies to advance open government reforms. And this has been done across different areas, from like open data platforms in South Cotabato in the Philippines, in the city of Buenos Aires, projects like Citizens' Eyes and Ears in Kaduna, in Nigeria, or open contracting in Paraguay, as I was just saying. So we really see the benefits of applying technology in order to make governments more inclusive, more responsive, which can, of course, help also reduce opportunities for corruption and enhance oversight. So as we see these benefits, what we've learned from open government reforms across sectors much applies to the e-government sector. One of the key lessons, I think, is that, and I think Jaimie also sort of referenced to this in her introduction, transparency alone does not lead to greater efficiency in tackling corruption automatically. The real benefits will be seen, when citizens and civil society are engaged, are consulted, when the data is being used. So to give you an example from the open data push that was initiated by civil society, by activists, by technologists several years ago, governments initially began publishing data sets in a very speedy way, right? But it was found then that most of those data sets were not used. So governments, were asking themselves, like, why is this happening? Well, there wasn't a community of users that was ready to use that data that was becoming available. So we now see a more clear trend towards actionable data that can be used by journalists, by entrepreneurs, by advocates, by citizens, which brings that additional layer of oversight, of accountability to the table. Governments, I think, are seeing the benefits of this and getting better at opening targeted data in several areas. So I think procurement, as Nancy was saying, but also on health and education, and really increasingly adopting some of the data standards and protocols that we already have. The open contracting data standard, the beneficial ownership data standard. There's several that are already, providing guidance to governments on how to open up the data, which, makes interoperability afterwards easier, etc. Another example is on a key policy area for anti-corruption and integrity, which is lobbying. This is, of course, an essential component of democracy, but also too often an opportunity for sort of undue influence that might lead to decisions being taken in favor of interest of those who have access to politicians. So digital tools can also bring more transparency to this process, which really enhances the citizen trust in government, which is at the end what we're looking for, right? To give you an example, Estonia used its OGP action plan to publish quarterly data on lobbying meetings with ministers and with high-level public officials, and civil society and journalists have begun to use this data to track which interest groups have influenced policy processes, which is, definitely a benefit that technology is bringing us. But if you don't have that civil society leg sort of using that data, then the results or the impact might not be there. So overall, I think digital tools or e-government have shown these benefits, but a real digital transformation entails a broader shift in the government culture, and the processes and the relationships with the citizens and with the civil society, and how you incorporate that to the planning process, to the design process, and to the implementation process of these policies. And just to give you a point of data, at OGP, we recently analyzed data from the past decade. So OGP was founded in 2011. So we now have a good amount of data coming from all the members that are co-creating action plans in their national and local context. So by analyzing the data, we found that civil society engagement throughout the OGP process is a strong predictor of ambitious commitments, of rates of implementation, and of early results of those commitments. So I think evidence shows that involving civil society in co-creation leads to better commitments and better reforms. And we have seen this across different policy areas, right? Today we're talking about anti-corruption, about digital government, where we've seen this, but also across areas like justice, like environment or climate policy. So I think when we talk about benefits of e-government, we really need to bring in this dimension of openness and of creating a culture of openness in order to really see those benefits of transparency.
And having 10 years worth of data, sharing that with the members would be a really good motivator, right? To push people to take a step in this direction. Sorry, Jaimie.
No, I wanted to see if I could jump in, because I feel like there are so many different things that Nancy and Paula have just touched on. And obviously I'm a consultant here, right? Because we like to apply these different frameworks. And for me, what we've just heard about almost fits into a framework around the impact of digital government on anti-corruption in sort of three lenses. And I'd be curious to hear Nancy and Paula's reactions to this. For me, the first one is around visibility, just basic visibility into government operations. And it can be proactive, so it could be data around contract awards, but it could also be reactive. So in Canada, it would be ATIP or FOIPA, so reactions to citizens or people saying, hey, I'd like to know what's going on in my government. Similarly, within the Government of Canada, there was a fairly popular function that was request a data set. Like, hey, government, I'd like to know what kind of data you have on XYZ. And then the department would make best efforts to try to disseminate that data. And I think it's worth highlighting that it wasn't that long ago that basic information on government operations was not available. The Gazette process in Canada around regulatory amendments, it's still a massive PDF. How many people, regulators, maybe, I don't know, maybe some members of the legal community go and read the Gazette, but I can't say it's, riveting reading for a Friday night. And so just basic transparency around government operations, Hansard is only, couple hundred years old. And so this notion of digitizing access to information about what your government is up to, I think is critical. Even basic things like GEDs. You can go, and anybody who says that they are a Government of Canada official, there is a directory, and you can go and see what is their job title, what is their position. That doesn't exist everywhere in the world. And I think just knowing, is the person I am talking to truly a government official? I think that this is, it's worth highlighting that transparency around government operations is really, really helpful, and digital can help achieve that at scale. A second lens for e-government or digital government having an impact is around state capacity. So to Nancy's point, things like clarity around regulatory processes, knowing what the steps are. You can order a pizza and have a pizza tracker that's telling you where your pizza is on the way from Domino's to your house. But you can't, in many cases, figure out where your application to put your fence in is, or you can't figure out where your application for a new passport is. And so this notion of having visibility into state capacity, the administrative state, I think is really valuable. And, particularly for things like regulatory compliance, saying, hey, I'm trying to operate a mine, where in the process is my application? And that visibility into the process, I think, is really valuable. And then the third one is building that culture of cross-sector collaboration around transparency. There are some amazing apps that communities have built. Paula referenced a few. One that jumped out at me was you can actually just Google it. Google "I paid a bribe," and it's for citizens reporting on bribes that they've paid to government officials. It's very cool. And these are not government organizations that are doing this. These are community groups. There's another one out of Colombia, and it's the White Elephant app. And essentially, it's procurement data, but it's crowdsourced. So as people are walking through their towns and they see a half-built hospital, they say, wait a second, what was actually approved? What actually got built? And where's the delta? What happened? Was it a change of government? Was it a corrupt contractor? And using these crowdsourced data sources mashed up with a government data source is tremendously powerful. And so across these sort of three frames of visibility around operations, building state capacity, the administrative state, and building a culture of cross-sector collaboration, I think we have benefits in terms of auditability. We have benefits in terms of performance, knowing, are government operations being effective? Are they being effective for all population groups? Are there equity issues at play? Are there efficiency issues at play? And ultimately, we're talking about building trust. And we can talk more about trust, but really it's about, do I believe that my government is capable of doing what I'd like it to do, and that their interests are aligned with mine as a resident of this jurisdiction? And then is there a track record and things like that? But ultimately, I think we see massive benefits when there is that systematic approach to building out government operations in a transparent and scalable way using digital tools.
There was a question that came in from the audience, Jaimie. I think this is best answered by you. Do you think it would be helpful to make a clearer distinction between data, which has less meaning without context and obviously hasn't been sort of transformed into intelligence, and information that is of interest to specific stakeholder groups? Someone needs to turn that data into information. How can a system ensure that the information can be trusted? Because, as you mentioned, poring over a 80-page PDF and having everyday people be responsible for that sort of intake of knowledge is not reasonable.
Absolutely. It's such a great question. And I'm sure Paula has lots of thoughts on this one too. When we were building out our open government program and open data, there were a lot of questions, partly informed by the federal policy on results, saying, hey, when you release it's like when a tree falls in the woods, doesn't make a sense. When you release a data set onto open.canada.ca, is there impact for Canadians? And so we would look at all these different measures, and you could look at, the number of downloads of the data set, for example. But now what happens if only one person downloads that data set, but it happens to be an investigative journalist that uses that data set to disseminate something nationally that is going to have a massive impact? Right? What happens if it's a data asset that is being accessed via an API? So it's a data stream, but it's then being disseminated through to just millions of Canadians. The weather data, for example. What's the impact of weather data? What's the economic value of, I knew to bring an umbrella to work today, right? And so quantifying these sorts of things can be very challenging. So do we need to be more deliberate about building that culture of interpretation? Yes, absolutely. And I think data reuse is critical. At the same time, being prescriptive, like I'm only going to invest in releasing this data because I know that it's going to be massively reused. Like that's not that helpful either. I remember at one point going through some of the impact measures that we had, and there was a data set that was being massively downloaded. And I thought, what on earth is this? Why is this so popular? And so I started looking into it. Nobody on my team could figure out why it was such a popular data set. I think it was some sort of agricultural yield data, which is valuable, but it was like, well, I didn't really think this was going to be really juicy data. And it ended up that there was a grad program. One of the universities, one of the profs was using that data to teach data analytics to their class. What's the economic impact of that for Canada? right? Like these things are very difficult to quantify. And so I think we can come up with measures that suggest that there is value, but saying one data set is more valuable than another is in my view, not a particularly useful exercise. Saying, this data asset comes with the opportunity to come up with wonderful, analytical abilities. That's really important. And we can talk a little bit about what do we digitize first. Some of the work that Nancy has been describing with e-procurement systems are to a large degree predicated on a data standard called the Open Contracting Data Standard that has 5 stages. As somebody who's tried to implement that data standard, I can tell you it is very hard and expensive to implement. And so at some point, we need to say, well, we are in an operational context where there are discrete resources. We're paying for this stuff using taxpayer dollars. So let's try to get the best bang for our buck. Maybe we don't implement all 5 stages right away, or maybe we prioritize and do a pilot based on 2 departments before we deploy it across all of government. I think that there is a level of pragmatism that has to come to play.
Jessie, if I may add just one comment and really echoing everything that Jaimie said, I think it's truly hard to sometimes measure the impact of open data portals and the specific data sets when governments are opening up that data. I think just to complement and on the point of trusting the data that was also part of the comment that we had in the chat, there's a huge importance that we need to put on the verification of the data. Jaimie was also speaking about data quality at the beginning, which of course is key. So in order to improve the data quality, how you verify the data is, one of the key points that you should be focusing on. And to be honest, like verification, in many cases comes from the civil society, from the journalists, from the entrepreneurs, from the private sector, the people that are really using the data that you put out there. So it's a process of building trust in the data also, and creating that bridge between data and information, as it was said in the comments. So I think in order to trust the data or to make sure that the people who will use the data will trust it, you need to provide opportunities for feedback. You need to provide opportunities for consultation with those that will be using the data. And you'll get fantastic feedback. That's something that we can assure you. And we've seen this across different governments, both at the national, local level. The feedback that you can get from that process of opening up your institution and hearing what the people who use the data have to say is fantastic.
Thank you, Jaimie and Paula. I am mindful of the time. We have a few other questions to get to, but I just wanted to sort of share my point of view from the private sector for this question, because, in government, you're dealing with the provision of these services or providing, consulting to the government, helping them put out the best possible e-government tools, making sure they're inclusive, making sure you're accounting for internet connectivity and all of the other issues, which we'll talk about soon. But from the private sector point of view, the benefits of e-government on a company is the reduction in government touch points. So working in a multinational company, you're interacting with government officials regularly. You're paying royalties and taxes. You are arranging for visas for your employees who are traveling or working at a location. You are having government inspectors come to your place of work, whether it's a mine site or a factory or food services, pharmaceutical companies. Anti-corruption programs exist in all of these companies for these reasons. So from my point of view, having digital government means that I don't have to account for so many variables for all of these interactions. So it could be as simple as charitable donations. So multinational corporations have sustainability goals and do charitable work on infrastructure or education, healthcare, women's rights, child labor, all of those topics in these different countries where they operate, including domestically. And so giving that money, if it's a transparent process, if they have all of the charitable requests listed and it's very clear where the money is going and what it's being used for, that's a huge decrease in the work required for these companies to make sure that the good faith payments that we're making are getting where they should be. And other topics would definitely be visas, transparency in bids for exploration, mining exploration. So that's a mining lens, but you're dealing with, manufacturers, companies in different places where they have factories or are developing projects. And another one that we haven't touched on, and this goes more to Jaimie's point about the public list, well, somewhat public list of government employees, where if we can see per diems, if companies have a visibility into government per diems, then we're not paying for those costs. If we have a government official coming to our site, for example, to do an environmental assessment. So that's just sort of the private point of view. And that leads us into our next question on services that lend themselves well to digital delivery. So, I mentioned visas, but visas are it's an easy one. It's maybe a smaller one than we're talking about with Nancy's, procurement being such a massive source of spend. But on a micro scale, being able to purchase a visa online and being able to do that not when you arrive at a destination and you are in the hands of this person that you are meeting at the airport, that is one simple, low-hanging sort of fruit that we could have, right, to reduce that exchange of funds and also the interaction itself, which I would say, obviously interaction with government would be one of the major precursors for corruption, because if you can't interact with someone, you can't pay them a bribe, right? So I think maybe we should start with Nancy on this one regarding the procurement side. So which government services lend themselves well to digital delivery or have already started? So obviously, I know you've already mentioned sort of a procurement system, but can you go into a little bit more detail on what that looks like and the process rolling that out and any other related services you think would sort of fit into that?
Sure. So a procurement system, whether it's digitized or not, has three basic phases. There's the tender preparation, advertising phase, and then the submission phase with submission. And then there's the bid evaluation phase, right? Where you're vetting all of the firms, negotiating contracts, and then there's the contract award. And then there's the third phase, which is the actual execution of the contract. So e-government procurement refers to the digitalization of any or all of those functionalities. So it's sort of an umbrella term. I know of no country that has a fully integrated procurement system. That is all of government, even down to the most local level. So typically what we see is that at federal level, central government level, the largest ministries, the ones that do have e-procurement systems, they have installed them in the largest ministries. And these are the ministries that spend the most. Education, like I said, hard infrastructure, defense. But that said, e-procurement is not the only place a government can reduce corruption. So for example, typically in a developing country, digitizing a government process has great benefits. I mean, we've done this in the past. We've done cost-benefit analysis on e-filing, e-filing of taxes, the payment of property taxes, income tax. We've done the registration of new businesses, the automation of VAT collection. So what we found is that, and these are interventions with very high returns, precisely because they reduce transaction costs of the client, whether that is a firm that's selling its product or service to the government, or the citizen that needs to interact with governments for documents or to pay their taxes or whatnot. So the decentralized digitization is as beneficial as a centralized procurement system.
A question came in from the audience, Nancy. It's talking about the benefit of personal contact. So the question is, my own experience as a bidder is that personal contact with the client is critical. So if I expect a request for qualifications because I know the client, I am much more likely to bid. How can digital procurement systems recognize the benefit of personal contact? So as we're discussing the benefits of a shift to e-government, this question is sort of asking how it can strike a balance.
That's interesting because one of the objectives of an procurement system is to reduce the contact. In the sense that you want to break what are traditional economic centers within a country. And every country has them. These powerful, wealthy families that have invested in significantly in sectors across the country. And so these families are long-standing, these large firms are long-standing, and they know everyone in government. In fact, they've even financed the campaigns of some of the parliamentarians or the representatives. So the point is you want to reduce that because that is the extreme of having some sort of contact with a client. That said, an e-government, an e-procurement system extends access to everyone. And so I could be a small, medium enterprise. I could be just an individual. There's a call for expressions of interest in a service. That's my area of expertise. And I now have access to the bidding documents. I now know when the process is going to take place. I know what documents I need. I know where to go. So in a way, it does both, right? It breaks these traditional corrupt relationships, and it opens government to people who would never have had access.
Thank you, Nancy. Jaimie, Paula, do you want to add anything to that before you respond to the question?
Yeah, it's a great question. Given that some of the things that we've been saying over the last hour have been vaguely coherent to you, and it seems vaguely useful to think about digital government for the purpose of driving anti-corruption and state performance and all that sort of thing, where do you start? For me, I would want to apply 3 large lenses. And the first is going to be impact on the people you serve. What is government good for? Government is here to serve the people. And so I would start with a criteria of where are the biggest pain points. We do research on that sort of thing within Deloitte, and we find that there are some real hiccups, and there is a growing expectation of design around life events, for example. The notion would be, if I show up and I have a baby, it should not take a rocket scientist to say, well, perhaps this individual is going to want a birth certificate and maybe a little bit of, some vaccines and maybe some education eventually. And so you can contemplate a sort of cascading flow of events. And so we've got all sorts, I can share publications on that sort of thing, but essentially looking at where is an investment going to have the best and highest impact outcomes for human experience. or user experience. I would also emphasize that customer experience or human experience is equally relevant to the user within. So if an investment in e-government is going to make your public servants more efficient, more empowered, that could also be very useful. So I would start with the impact on user experience. The second would be the impact on operations. Are you going to create massive efficiencies? Are you going to automate a process that was otherwise rife with opportunities for corruption, that sort of thing? And then the third big one would be cost. These are not costless endeavors. In many cases, some of the e-procurement systems that we've been referencing, these are multi-million-dollar systems that can carry some degree of implementation risk. Just for a variety of reasons, but largely because they are associated with really large, complex business transformations. So those are the sorts of criteria that I would apply. The sorts of things that come out with, as excellent candidates would be then things like robotic process automation. In many governments right now, data management is done through fairly old, very manual systems. And so you have humans copying and pasting data between data systems. You can automate that. We do this sort of work on my team all the time. And it gets rid of human error. It also gets rid of the opportunity for nefarious activity. It's high impact, and it's going to make the employee experience much, much better. So that's something that would score relatively high. It's also often not astronomically expensive. Other things that you can think about sort of as low-hanging fruit, a granting system. Many government grants are administered through manual processes. It's very difficult to have any kind of actionable intelligence about the impact of those grants if you're not doing it through a digital system. Who is getting the grants? How are they being awarded? What's the time from application to award? Is there discrimination in how they're being awarded? Are you only rewarding traditional grantees that have already gone through your grant management process 1,000 times? Are there implicit biases? So granting forms, the number of forms. We were doing a project recently where it was based on form-based data. We found 28 ways that lawyers have written the word Vancouver. Like, how does that make any sense, right? So controlled vocabularies. This is, it means that people like my team, we don't have to do the data cleansing. And so having controlled vocabularies, having systems for data management can be much better for the human experience. The person filling out the form probably doesn't love, having to sort this thing out. And so automation in that regard. Jessie gave a wonderful example from the mining sector. Here in BC, we have a great case study. I'd encourage you to all check out the Mines Digital Service that takes many traditional paper-based processes and says, let's make this more transparent. And in so doing, creates all sorts of regulatory efficiencies. So those would be my big criteria: impact on human experience, the impact in terms of operational efficiencies, and cost. That's what I would use to come up with my short list of where to start.
Thanks, Jaimie. Paula?
Wow, that has been super comprehensive, and I think a lot has been mentioned already, including from the points that I wanted to make. Perhaps just one point to add in terms of also related to very much to public procurement, but also platforms that disclose information about budget expenditures, which are, of course, a key resource for sort of anti-corruption efforts and how resources are managed or mismanaged, having opportunities for oversight on that. Perhaps another benefit that we saw more recently during the pandemic is how countries that had already invested in setting up those open procurement systems, those open budget platforms, those accountability platforms, were already better equipped than other governments to respond and adapt faster to the context of the pandemic. So that, I think, is an added benefit. And some of these platforms had already been included in government action plans, in open government action plans. And so not only could they sort of build on those transparency efforts and adapt to new contexts better? But also, the coming of the pandemic meant that they didn't have to build those new tools from scratch, right? So the benefit there was a speedier sort of response. Another example, perhaps, and there are several countries that are doing this in a very interesting way. I was sort of mentioning or had in mind the digital nations. Canada is part of the digital nations. Estonia has done fantastic work in terms of digitizing government services. I was talking to an Estonian, and Estonia has been our co-chair last year in the OGP. Really, the power of digital platforms there is really fantastic, and you can almost, like, your interactions with the public sector are almost all digital now. I was talking to an Estonian, and they were saying something like, well, one of the things that you cannot do digitally is getting divorced, like filing divorce. Well, because you need to go there, present yourself with your partner in order to do so. But really, aside from that, there's a lot that has been digitized already, and this really created a culture of more transparency in the country as well. Uruguay is also making some very interesting work on this, including on being one of the first countries that has included a commitment in their OGP action plan to look into the transparency of algorithms, of the use of algorithms in the public sector. This has been a big trend, of course, in Europe. Europe is now discussing the AI Act, but also seeing those efforts coming from other countries in other jurisdictions, like in Latin America, is very interesting and valuable. The government use of algorithms is certainly something that needs to be underscored when you talk about a digital transformation and how you make those algorithms open and how citizens can access the systems that are behind those decisions or those those sources of information for decisions to be made. So I think that's just taking a few points from what others said as well, but just to reinforce that the focus should not be sort of only on the what are we digitizing, but also on the how. So digital transformations and systems, whether they're public or they're private, should be transparent, should be participatory, should be inclusive and accountable. As we always highlight in OGP, the impact of digital tools is only really going to be as strong as the human systems that are around that technology and that are really providing oversight to the implementation of that technology. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a flurry of questions coming in, but I might save some of these for the end. Although I do think this is a good point to talk about. One of the questions that came in is about smaller jurisdictions. So, I mean, Nancy, you have work experience in some of these areas. All three of you do, actually. But how do you, what advice would you give to someone working in a smaller jurisdiction where you have a conflicted elite? So the people who hold the power have the conflict of, continuing to maintain that power or have financial gain versus providing these services. So Jaimie, you spoke earlier about pain points. So those would probably be something that, wouldn't really impact any illicit earnings that are coming to leaders. If you're dealing with birth certificates and things like that, it's not going to have as significant of an impact as if we're talking about e-procurement. And while e-procurement is probably the biggest or one of the biggest sources of, illicit funds going where they shouldn't, there are a bunch of other government services as well where I think procurement and other topics would be good for this. So I'll let you guys jump in for this one.
Nancy, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So there were costs that were readily quantifiable, in large part because the World Bank finances e-procurement platforms, e-government procurement platforms around the world. And so we were able to get cost estimates for these platforms. But not all costs were included in our research, could not be included in our research. And that's because we know they exist, but we don't know how to measure them. And so a head of state that decides to implement e-government procurement platform has to face political risk, obviously. There are negotiation costs. I mean, there's a negotiation that happens with these families where you strike a compromise for them to cede some percentage of the market, of the monopoly that they hold. I know this sounds strange to Canadians, but this is how the developing world very much works. I mean, there are dominant firms in every sector. And so this negotiation has to happen, and that takes time. And that obviously has a cost. The electorate, citizens pay a high cost for that. And then there are things which wouldn't come to mind in an advanced economy, like electricity coverage. And this is as much the case for firms as it is for remote households. So ensuring a stable and universal coverage of electricity is one of the things that has to come first. And then internet coverage. And so this is very much not the case in most low-income and lower middle-income countries. And that is the low-hanging fruit, in the sense that they're extremely costly endeavors. But once that investment is made, once the internet, energy, and negotiations are taken care of, addressed, then think of all the other interventions that can come out of that. The increase in labor productivity, innovation, and science, agro-industry, education. So yeah, that would be my response.
Paula, do you want to speak a little bit about Latin or South America?
Yeah, so I think I would agree with some things that were said already. I think one thing that we really need to keep in mind when we're talking about digitizing services, and perhaps moving a little bit away from only the procurement angle, but overall, we need to consider that there are certain regions where, of course, Latin America is, Africa as well, Asia, some parts of Asia. We need to look at the digital divide, right? At the gap in connectivity. Access to the internet and devices is still very low in many countries. So, an important percentage of the world's population is still offline. And if you also look at some studies, they show that there are fewer women than men who access the internet. So there's some things that we should, of course, keep in mind when talking about going digital. And digital literacy is another point that should also be kept in mind. Perhaps one example that is not from Latin America, but comes from our local program, which is growing and growing. There's a lot of energy coming from municipalities, from local jurisdictions, working on these areas. In the city of Kaduna in Nigeria, the government had sort of admitted openly that it was overspending and under-delivering in infrastructure projects, which are, of course, very vulnerable to corruption. And to address this, they used their OGP action plan with the civil society in Kaduna, with the citizens mostly, to sort of enlist citizens to monitor government infrastructure projects. And as part of this initiative, the government disclosed geolocation of these publicly funded projects, and citizens uploaded photos and provided feedback on how these projects were implemented. So we're really being encouraged to monitor the progress. And the digital tools that they used included apps like on your phone, but you could also do it via an SMS or a phone hotline. So they really took into account the differences in access that one can see at the local level. And I think that's interesting, and we really need to underscore those implications when we look at implementing digital transformation. Not everyone will have access to this. So how can we take that into account in order to provide alternative solutions for those that may not have the access to the internet?
Yeah, Jessie, I'll jump in. I think these are fabulous responses. I would really emphasize that I think the answer around the barriers to digital adoption vary by jurisdiction and point in time. Elite capture is going to be a massive issue in many developing contexts, a little bit less so in a Canadian context. We did a fairly significant piece of research last year around public sector adoption of cloud, which is not a perfect proxy, but I think a decent proxy for digital adoption in Canada. And we found 4 barriers to what is holding governments back when it comes to cloud adoption in Canada. The first was around leadership, saying, okay, how are we actually going to move forward and do this? There were real barriers in terms of the IT organization talking to the business organization, the business going through approvals, going to a treasury board and saying, okay, this is what we're building. And IT saying, no, we can't do it within that budget, within those timelines. And so the siloed nature of government, which is there, for interesting reasons based on Westminster-style democracy and our traditional accountabilities, though we have these silos, which make it sometimes quite difficult to be coordinated. So that divergence between IT and business was a huge one. Capacity, just having people within governments that know how to do digital well. This is an emerging field. It's really challenging to do this work. And there are lots of big mistakes that happen all the time. There's a fabulous book that I would recommend to everybody, Bent Flyberg and Dan Gardner, How Big Things Get Done. And it goes through a huge database of all these challenging projects. Highest risk projects in the world are nuclear reactors followed by IT projects. And so this is no joke, right? These are very complex projects, and there's a real limitation on digital capabilities that are available within government. And then there are other things, like outdated accounting strategies, for example, or really onerous security requirements, things like that. And so across the board, we have these things that exist in the public sector across Canada, around the world, that make it more challenging to embark on any of these digital transformations. And so I think a lot of times what we end up doing is delegating some of this digitization or e-government to the IT team, whereas the IT is often not the tough part. The technology that we have available to us is getting better and cheaper every day. SaaS products, so products that are relatively easy to implement, that are well maintained, they are ubiquitous and they are excellent. We do these implementations all the time. What's really challenging, however, is getting a really great understanding of the experience that you're trying to generate, and then adapting your technology to drive that experience, coupling that implementation with a business transformation so that the implementation can be effective, driving the efficiencies that you want. And then to Paula's point, driving equity. We also did a research study last year on digital equity in Canada. Previously, we didn't really have great primary data in Canada. We were using US or UK numbers. It ends up that we have extremely serious digital equity problems in Canada that are far more nefarious, far more endemic than we ever would have imagined. I'm happy to share that research, but really, if you are looking to digitize an experience in Canada today, think hard about for who. For who are you digitizing? Because if you just say, oh, for Canadians, rather than designing around an underserved community or a marginalized user, in all likelihood, the majority will not be able to navigate your service because we have very severe digital equity issues in this country. So, Jessie, there are lots and lots of barriers.
Not that we should be deterred. These are just challenges, right? Just challenges for us to face. So we've covered a lot of the barriers. Nancy talked about political risk and priorities like electricity. And I'm not sure if everyone's following the news, but in South Africa, they have, I think, 2 to 3 hours a day with no electricity because of sort of crumbling infrastructure, right? So priorities, and that is going to impact how long it takes to get to sort of the e-government services that we're talking about beyond setting up that infrastructure, because without the electricity and internet services and sort of telecom infrastructure, we can't get to any of this. We talked about the digital divide and digital equity and digital literacy, and I would talk about probably different countries, and I would add in the age demographic in those countries. So if you have a really top-heavy population with a lot of senior citizens who don't necessarily have the exposure, although there are a lot of libraries that are providing courses and family members that are helping, but I'm sure all of us have at one point sat down with someone and tried to show them how to do something on the internet when they haven't done it before, and it's quite difficult. I would also, and I don't know if anyone has anything to add to this, but I would just put out there that data privacy is probably a topic that we would need to consider as those laws are evolving, and keeping up with how the data is maintained and access and all of that would be something to factor into the conversation. The next question that we've got lined up is on what we need, what resources are needed. So I believe that exposure to government is a significant contributing factor to corruption. And I think it's important to look at this from the corruption point of view, because in terms of, providing electricity and internet services, which are a critical precursor for the necessities that we have, let's sort of move to the digital delivery of these services as opposed to filling those needs, which I know needs to happen first, and in many countries is still being worked on. But what resources do you think governments need to be able to more effectively and more quickly move some of these services to digital delivery? And I know Nancy mentioned earlier a really good point that no government has fully moved top to bottom to a digital delivery. But I mean, think about your experience at a grocery store where you have a line that you can go through and get customer service, or you can do your self-checkout. So some of these may end up being hybrid solutions to allow for like inclusivity, but what do governments need? So Jaimie, I'd like to start with you on that because you're dealing with providing this advice.
Yeah, great question. If I had one thing, I get with the teams and I'll say, if you had magic pixie dust and you could sprinkle it across your government partner, what would you do? My number one thing is I would build capacity for design. I would get it so that all public servants everywhere in the world have an augmented ability to think through human-centered design, equity-centered design, and say, not how do I do it, but what should I build? what service, what experience will lead to better outcomes, more participation, more, more efficient service delivery, whatever it might be. The other things, I've got a whole list of things that we would relate to the digital capacity for anti-corruption and whatnot, but they're almost secondary. There are lots of experts available, particularly in Canada, where we have a tremendously high-performing public service. The challenge is the choice initially to design and build a thing. Afterwards, there's, there are wonderful digital teams within government, the Canadian Digital Service, within the provincial government, similarly, my old team within the government of British Columbia. These are incredibly talented and passionate technologists and data experts who are quite capable of building wonderful things. There's my team at Deloitte. Many of our competitors have wonderful digital teams also. We have the ability to do things. What I think we sometimes lack is imagination, and that initial desire to say, hey, we can imagine a better, healthier relationship between the people and the state. We can imagine an environment where procurement data is used not to, bust poor behavior, but to generate innovation. We can imagine this more, positive environment. And that, I think, is a basic sort of ideation process that comes with excellent design skills. So I would require every public servant to go through a boot camp around human-centered design, framing, ideating, doing user research, going out and talking to Canadians. What do you want? What do you need? We are in an environment of scarce resources. We should not digitize everything we could possibly digitize. That's not good for the taxpayer. But I think making that choice on the basis of what the people who are actually paying for this stuff, Canadians, what Canadians think and want, that is absolutely the first place to start, in my view.
Paula?
Definitely agree with what Jaimie has already said. I think what we see in OGP, as I was saying at the start, we interact a lot with government officials that are implementing these policies, and we see high demand for peer learning, for sharing knowledge across different countries, regions, connecting with networks. I think when you sort of talk to a senior official that is implementing a digital policy, they're very conscious and committed to their teams being part of these networks. And the possibilities are sometimes also very much put into a very few set of people who have access to those. So really enhancing the amount of peer learning, but also the quality of peer learning that we can provide on these themes, and on sharing what the results of the digitization processes were, I think is key. We also see high demand for resources and guidance on how to bring participation as part of the planning process. So as Jaimie was saying, during the design process. So OGP is all about multi-stakeholder dialogue, about bringing the different actors to the table, about discussing policies from the design and to the implementation. We receive a lot of questions from government officials saying, where do I start, basically? So I do want to bring in people. I have the intention of doing it. Where do I start? So I think resources related to sort of building those networks, building the civic engagement, building coalitions for change, because anti-corruption is not a technical fix, right? We're not going to solve the problem of corruption by only putting data sets out there, right? We really need to build those coalitions that make these policies sustainable, but also that, build the political mobilization around these efforts that we need. And we also need the private sector buy-in on it. And as you were mentioning before, Jessie, the perspective from the private sector is important here, because there are many policies that affect the private sector. So we need them to sit at the table. So, I think resources in terms of like where to start is something that we hear a lot from government officials. And of course, the open government process in the countries that are members is where we would point them to, and some resources that we also have on how to include citizen engagement and civil society engagement is where what we would reference usually. And an additional point that Jaimie also mentioned, I think, is leadership capacities. We co-created with the open government community a new strategy for the OGP for the next 5 years. And one of the things that the new strategy underscores, because we've heard this from the community, is how open government leaders need to be supported so that they have the skills, the networks, the resources, the tools to continue expanding the community and implementing these ambitious reforms across different areas, whether it's anti-corruption, digital, and others. So, they also really need to be connected with each other as part of national, thematic, and global networks that help strengthen their networks and their learning, as I was saying at the beginning. So I think that's what we have been mainly hearing in terms of resources that are needed. But again, I think if there's one point that I would like to highlight is that corruption cannot be fixed by there's no technical fix for corruption, and there's no silver bullet for corruption. So it's a whole infrastructure that we need to build, and this also requires bringing in supreme audit institutions, so those institutions that are auditing corruption and government processes and the implementation of certain policies, the expenditure of budgets. So it's really a constellation and an ecosystem of accountability that we need to build around this.
That ecosystem probably would need to include quite a few factors, right? Precursors. So you talked about knowledge, leadership, things like that. In terms of corruption, I would add in sort of a desire, which means that pressure needs to be placed on government by civil society and voters to say that, combating corruption through all possible means is a priority. I'm guessing fair wages is probably also a really good point to make here, where, if we're paying our officials a fair wage, they are less likely to want to engage in corrupt behavior. And I realize I'm talking maybe not about executive level leadership, but government officials at all different levels. And probably media. So if we have a country with free media, sharing messaging around the harms of corruption and tangible examples. So anyone who works in corruption, they use these examples when they do their trainings or when they're discussing the topic. So we talk about corruption in the Peru construction industry and how no one could drive because there were so many unnecessary, delayed, drawn out construction projects that people were driving 2 and 3 times as long to get back and forth to work, right? So if you've got messaging around the harms of corruption and public pressure on that topic, then you'll have more support for e-government projects. So I see that all kind of flowing together. Nancy, is there anything you'd like to add for that question?
Yes, I'll add the perspective coming from a developing country. The ecosystem of accountability would include what I mentioned before, energy and internet coverage. It would also include a more amenable regulatory framework. So what a country needs is a freedom of information. Freedom of information laws. E-signature is one that is not common. They also need laws allowing transactions, digital transactions. But a lot of these things don't actually exist. And so an e-government procurement system is a bit premature for some of these countries. Another need is human resources. or rather removing the nepotism that exists in many government ministries and replacing relatives with technicians, trained procurement officers, trained civil servants who are trained in delivering citizen-centered services. So I would add also, lastly, there are adjustment costs, which is to say there's a culture now, which I heard even exists in Canada. Someone mentioned a site where you can see who paid what bribe. So there's a culture of bribery. So people expect to pay and people expect to be paid. So there's sort of, I'm calling it an adjustment cost, but there needs to be a campaign around that, around civicism, civic education, and citizen responsibilities.
Thank you. All right, I think we have 10 or 15 minutes left, and I just want to try to address a few of the questions that have come in while we were talking. I'm going to start off with Nancy. This one's coming to you, so don't mute too soon. How do you find, in terms of the e-procurement, how do you find the best company? How do you encourage bids? How do you communicate this out if you're switching to an e-procurement model?
I don't think the digitization of the procurement process changes the vetting process. The vetting process remains the same. Now, the only thing now is that you're presumably vetting a larger number of enterprises. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
Well, I think the question is around how do you encourage bids if you're at that process? So I guess maybe it's just a general comment on how that is communicated, whether it's done manually or whether it's done through a digital delivery.
Well, as I mentioned, any government procurement platform has quite a few functionalities. And so governments don't digitize all of them. They can't digitize all of them, and at all stages of government. And so there's a lot of literature on this, but there are 4 functionalities which are considered primary and crucial to stemming corruption. And the first pertains to the question, which is, how do you announce that the government is now prepared to buy a particular product or service? How do you let the country know? And so to the extent that that is digitized in the sense that it reaches everyone's phone, depending on the infrastructure available in the country, it reaches their smartphone. There's an SMS that's sent out. Here in Haiti, we get SMSs about what government is doing. It could be that there's internet, the ministry is online, and they post the announcement online. It could be that the ministry already has pre-registered, pre-qualified firms, and they release the announcement. It depends on what's already in place, but generally that is how, or in print media, I mentioned newspaper, which I guess is less in the advanced economies, but we are still functioning with printed newspapers. So it depends on what's in place, what infrastructure is in place.
Okay, thank you. Jaimie, I've got one for you. because it's 2023 and no group of people can get together without talking about AI. We had an AI question come in, and we all knew it was coming. The question is, what will the impact be of generative AI on this process? So presumably on the sort of switch towards e-government.
A great question. It's something I actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about. I think it's going to be transformative. You know, I feel like for the last 10 years when I've spoken about digital government, I've started with, a reminder that we are entering the fourth industrial revolution. And it's like, whatever was happening over the last 10 years has just been kicked into high gear. I think the opportunities are massive. A lot of, I'm sort of loath to call it low value work, but highly repeatable, automatable activities are now going to be candidates. I mentioned earlier robotic process automation. We're going to be able to do all sorts of things in a repeatable fashion, much, much faster. And I mean, sometimes people get a little bit concerned because they say, oh, does that mean job loss? No, quite the opposite. It means that people who are currently spending their time doing highly repeatable tasks without very much creativity or innovation, they're actually going to be able to spend more time on high value activities. You could take an example of, in a human services context, where you have caseworkers who are going to check on kids in foster care, for example, who are going and doing their home visits and then spending a huge amount of time making sure that the data about their home visits is accurately preserved and stored and all that sort of thing. When there are efficiencies there, it doesn't mean that that person loses their job. It means they get to spend more time doing things that only humans can do. So I see a huge opportunity to accelerate some of the management of sort of more repeatable tasks that can be automated. On the flip side, I also think we're going to have to get a whole lot smarter about things like ethics in the application of AI. Canada was an early mover with the directive on automated decision making. And you'd have to fact check me here, but I seem to recall that it was around 2017, 2018 when we released that. And Canada was the leading government at the time in terms of this thinking. That directive on automated decision making ended up informing GPAI, G20 decisions. It was a huge, huge move. I think that some of the progress has perhaps slowed a little bit. In other governments, we see, for example, the UK, that took some of that progress and then said, fabulous, but we need to go even further upstream. And they created their Center for Data Ethics and Innovation. And I think that that's the sort of thing that we need to start thinking about, not just the ethics around the algorithms, but the ethics of the data that is going in to inform those algorithms. There are a couple of great examples in Canada of governments that are thinking through this stuff really carefully. I'd actually call out the government of British Columbia. The Anti-Racism Data Act is a game changer for us here in British Columbia, in that it requires community involvement of what it looks like to collect race-based data in our home. And so doing things like that and proactively putting in place protections for what may or may not be underserved communities is going to be critical as we see greater prevalence around the use of algorithms. So Cole's notes, I'm excited. I think it's going to make us a whole lot more efficient. And we need to continue to be vigilant and proactively put protections in place.
Thank you.
May I add, Jessie, just 2 minutes, and I think Jaimie covered the question very well from sort of both sides. I think from OGP we see a lot of sort of traction in the discussions around safeguards and how AI is being used in the public sector, how this will be sort of regulated, safeguards in terms of data protection, how we can make publicly available the data through, for instance, transparency of registers for algorithms. And we have convened a small group of public officials working on this to exchange some learnings where Canada participated together with countries like Netherlands, France, the UK, countries that are advancing open algorithms policies. And Canada was one of the first to implement the algorithmic impact assessments tool. And there were several other governments who were very interested in those, in that experience. The Netherlands, for instance, introduced a fundamental rights and algorithms impact assessment, which is also very interesting. So I think there's really a lot that we need to discuss still in terms of safeguards. And you know, there was an open government challenge that was recently launched to the community of open government reformers to include commitments in their action plan on how, you know, data processing and automated decision-making policies are being done, especially those governing the public sector. And some of the actions that are encouraged to be taking are related to the transparency of algorithms registers, but also embedding human rights impact assessments into the use of AI, creating public grievance mechanisms, and sort of strengthening the independent oversight of agencies, among a few others. But just wanted to sort of echo Jaimie's point on that and say there's already a lot of experience. The EU is discussing right now here in Brussels the AI Act, which will, you know, is looking into how the deployment and use of AI is being regulated across Europe. So I think there's a lot of initial learning on this area that we really need to share across the different countries and regions.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have time for, and we have 2 minutes if anyone wants to add anything. Otherwise, I'll go into our closing statement.
I've got one, if I may, Jessie. Hopefully some of these topics were exciting to the people participating today. And just given the location that many of you are based in BC, I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't draw attention to an upcoming event. So the Canadian Open Data Summit will be happening in Victoria towards the end of November at UVic, co-hosted by the Government of British Columbia. And so I would love, you know, if these are interesting conversations, there's a community of people in Canada who spend a lot of time thinking about these topics and working together, sharing best practices, sharing code, sharing lessons. It's a community that I'm proud to be a part of, and I've been for many years. And I would love for many people who are joining the call today to join us in Victoria towards the end of November.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank our panelists again, and also our audience for your time, and also for the professional focus on this topic, which is not maybe broadly discussed in the way that it should be. And I'd also like to thank Sarah McDonald at the UBC technical team for putting this together for us. Sarah is probably ahead of some of us on digital knowledge, so it was really good having her here and providing support. For future viewing pleasure, this webinar will be saved on the Anti-Corruption Law Program LinkedIn page and the Center for Business Law website. Also, there are all of the webinars that have been hosted by these groups over the last 3 years. And finally, I have one more introduction, which is Rachel Siegels. Rachel is a lawyer with a Master of Laws degree from Osgoode Law School. She spent many years working in federal political offices, including for 2 members of Parliament, the federal government House Leader, and the Federal Minister for Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. She acted as a Director of Policy to a Canadian Senator and has worked in both provincial and municipal politics in Ontario, BC, and the mayoral campaign in Vancouver. Rachel has extensive broadcast experience working full-time on air for a Canadian television news network and a weekly radio contributor with News Talk 1010 in Toronto and CBC in Vancouver, primarily in the afternoons. In 2023, she founded an organization called Beyond a Ballot with a mission to move Canadian women towards politics. If you aren't already following Rachel on LinkedIn to see her podcasts there, you can catch them on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And as if all of that isn't quite enough to fill someone's day, she also has been a project manager for Vancouver Anti-Corruption Institute, and I'm glad she took that role on because that's how we met a few years ago. So Rachel, would you mind sharing the closing statements for us for today's webinar?
Well, thank you for that lengthy bio there, Jessie. And hello to everybody watching. My name is Rachel Siegel, and as Jessie noted, I have been involved with the Vancouver Anti-Corruption Institute since before its inception in 2021. And so it's an institute that's very dear to my heart and has worked on some incredible projects and continues to work on incredible projects, including in this space of digital government. We're so thrilled to have been able to put together this fascinating webinar on this topic. That's of great interest to us at VACI, the use of digital government in combating corruption. And wow, what a panel. I asked all of you, the three panelists, and Jessie, obviously the moderator, to join us, not even realizing just how fascinating this discussion would be. So I'm blown away. I want to thank our incredible panelists, Paula, Nancy, and Jaimie. Your contribution to this area of work on a daily basis is incredible all around the world. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to help educate this audience and the people that will be watching this recording today. Jessie, thank you for your very heavy lifting on the moderation side of things for this panel. It's very much appreciated and took the weight off of me. So I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you to our partners, the Anti-Corruption Law Program, the Center for Business Law at UBC and Transparency International, to Joe Weiler, John Ritchie, Norman Baldwin for your help on this webinar and our work. We thank you very much. And personally, thank you for keeping me going and in line and making sure that this happens. So couldn't have done it without you guys. The Vancouver Anti-Corruption Institute, or VACI, is dedicated to the advancement of the rule of law in Canada and abroad, with an emphasis on anti-corruption and anti-money laundering efforts. The Institute, within iClear, is focused on education, research, training, and helping international organizations, governments, and communities develop strategies to counter corruption in all of its form. Through our work, we hope to make a difference by supporting domestic and international efforts to strengthen public institutions and rid countries of corruption in the best way that we can. VACI has been working on a project related to digital government, which focuses on barriers and adoption of digital government in Canada and around the world in order to encourage broader adoption of digital government tools to aid in the fight against corruption. And I think today the panelists very clearly outlined why we are so dedicated to that project and moving governments towards digital government as a tool to combat corruption globally and also within our borders here in Canada. I want to make one note that on November 2nd and 3rd, VACI will be hosting our second annual anti-corruption conference. This year, the focus is on combating crypto crime, which along with AI is one of those topics that everyone's talking about in 2023 and a very important topic globally. The conference is taking place in Vancouver, BC, and chaired by former Prime Minister and VACI advisory member, the Right Honorable Kim Campbell. If you're interested in joining the conference, we would absolutely love to have you. You can register or find more information on our website, which is www.iclear.org/VACI. That's ICCLR.org/VACI. And finally, I want to thank all of you who have joined us today for what is a very critical conversation. It's critical that we come together as a global community to fight corruption everywhere. And it's discussions like this and the many discussions that the Anti-Corruption Law Program puts on that are going to help build our community and build those tools globally to combat corruption. So with that, I think we are going to close here and thank everybody so much for joining us. Again, the panelists and Jessie, and we look forward to you joining more webinars in the future. So have a wonderful day and thanks again.